how to use the polar grid tool in Illustrator. I'm using CC220 and you can see a variety of different designs created using the polar grid tool. So you can see you can create just by changing the radial and concentric settings, and you can find the polar grid in the toolbar. Go down beneath the Align Segment tool and select the polar grid tool. Now if you can't find it, you're probably in basic mode. So Window menu and Toolbars and go to Advanced. Now that should be the same 219, 218, etc. So simply select the tool and then just apply the polar grid and the current settings will be applied. And you can modify the settings just by double clicking on the polar grid tool. And you can see when you go into the polar grid, you've got radial and concentric. They're the main ones, main settings. So you've got 5, the spokes, the lines going out from the center are the radial, and the concentric is set to 5 as well. They're the rings. So double click and you can see the settings there. You've got the width and the height. Now that only matters when you actually just want to create it, just clicking on the document to use it without changing the settings. But if you want to, you can simply just drag and create the height and width exactly as you want it. So you can just change the settings for radial and concentric and you get these variety of different designs. And you can manipulate them. They're just simple paths. Now I'm just going to zoom in now so you can see the radial there. So you've got select there, the move tool. And what you can do, you can move it around. You can resize it using the bounding box. You can rotate it. You can distort it. And you can break it apart as well. You can ungroup it via the object menu. So if you want to, go to object menu and ungroup. And then basically what you've got is lots of circles and some lines coming out. So ungroup and ungroup. I have to ungroup it a few times. And then you can select the individual parts of that. You might not want to do that, but you can do that if you want. It's useful if you want to manipulate it, maybe change the colour of some of maybe the rings, maybe make one ring green, one of the rings blue, etc. That's what you want to do with the polar grid. You can also duplicate it. You can hold down the Alt or Option key and duplicate it. Simply select the pass and then hold down Alt or Option and duplicate. You can also change the fill as well. So you can just go to fill, and this is for all of the others as well. I'm just selected that one for this. So Window and Properties. So you can set that to maybe green, red, blue, whatever. So the fill will be applied. And also, of course, you can change the stroke as well. So you can go to the stroke, you can turn it, maybe use the width tool. So you can create different widths as well for that. Also, you can maybe set it into dash. There's a whole range of different options for the stroke. You can obviously, the key one being the actual width or weight of the stroke, as well as the colour, of course. And also you can change the opacity as well if you want to do that. So you can reduce the opacity, maybe make it 50%. So it sort of disappears. Still there, of course, but it just fades away. I'll just change that back to black. What you can then do, of course, you can set other settings for the concentric and radial. So you don't have to have 5 and 5. You can have 20 and 9, 8 and 10, whatever you want. This time, 10 and 10. So here you'll notice got 10 rings as well as the outer ring. The outer ring is an addition. Can't remove that. So if you set the concentric to 0, you will still get the outer ring, which you can remove because it's just like I say, pass. You can ungroup it and remove the actual ring if you don't want the ring. So you can just change the settings there and then you've got that design. So it's 10 and 10. So again, you've got 10 spokes, or radial settings as it says, and you've got the 10 concentric. And again, what you can do, you can go to ungroup, or you can double click it and break it down, manipulate the individual parts, or apply effects to it, or add a shadow to it, or export it to Photoshop. And also what you can do, you can duplicate that as well by holding down the Alt or Option key. Okay, and you can ungroup, or you can expand it. So go down to Object Menu and Expand, and you make it just one solid path. It's not made up of individual paths at that point, which you may or may not want. Up to you. Also, once you've done that, of course, what you can do, you can go to Window and Pathfinder and actually make it completely one solid path. So combine, just go there and click that, and now one solid complete design, which you can then manipulate, add additional points to it, etc. And you can resize it, distort it, modify it in numerous ways. You can, of course, fill it with a solid colour, or maybe a gradient, or pattern designs, whatever you want to do. But it's still, of course, radial equals 10, concentric equals 10. And you can't manipulate that anyway. It's not a live tool, sadly. It'd be nice if it was a live tool, but it's not. Now, this one option is radial equals 1. So just one line. Now, if you went for radial equals 2, you would have the line split right through the entire thing. And just set it to 1. And of course, you can still ungroup that, you can still expand it, you still apply effects, all those sort of things. Exactly the same as all the others. And you can Object Menu and ungroup. Ungroup again. You have to do it a couple of times. And then you can move the circles. Just move them around, change the colours if you wish. Maybe go to the stroke, maybe make some of the circles with dash settings, or maybe change the width profile. Up to you. Or change the colour. So you've obviously got circles made up obviously of mainly black, but you've got an orange circle now. Maybe change the size of the weight. Make it 10 or 20. And you can vary that, modify that. Of course, once it's still live, so you can still go, not live in terms of you can change it with the tool, but it's still, at least you can manipulate the individual parts. With the concentric 10 and 10, when I expanded that, that was it. You can't change it, you can't manipulate it. It's like, as soon as you use the Pathfinder, that's it. But here you can still manipulate it in many different ways to create many different designs. Now this one is one where you've got radial is set to 0. And concentric is set to 10. Again, it's very confusing because it's actually, you've got 11, but the outer ring is not counted in that. So concentric equals, now I could of course made it concentric equals 30 or 40 or 50. So you can create really intense rings very quickly using this approach. Now this one, you've got radial equals 40, concentric equals 4. So you've got a lot of radial spokes there and not so many concentric. So that's another design you can use. And there's so many different designs you can create just from really 2 settings. So you can see you can create these, and you can still manipulate the path remove items. So if you decide, you know what, I'm going to remove that, maybe the third circle in, the third ring in, you can just remove it using the ungroup. This one, radial equals 20, concentric equals 0. Like I said, you've still got the outer ring. The outer ring is always created, but you can always ungroup it, and you can just remove it if you want to do that. Just delete it. You can't select it at this point and just say delete, because it will just delete the whole polar grid. Now I've got the skew. Now I very rarely use skew. In fact, I only used it for the example. Skew is one of those ones that I've never seen much use for. But you can use it. And actually you can use it to create some very interesting different designs, especially if you're using it with the concentric setting more than maybe the radial. But I'm certain people, maybe if you're using it for like pie slices, maybe if you can manipulate it that way, I don't know. Personally, not something I use that often, but you can use the skew setting with radial and create that. Now with this one, you've got concentric is 5 plus skew. Now if you double click into the tool, if you go into the polar grid tool, you will actually see beneath each of the entries, the concentric or radial, you will see skew setting. You can experiment with that to create all kinds of different circles like that. Again, something I don't often use, I must admit. And this time, radial equals 5, concentric equals 5, obviously the default settings. And I've just duplicated it. So you can see what you can do. You can create a vast number of these circle designs, polar grids, and duplicate them over and over again. Now the actual tool. So I've just shown you some examples. So select the polar grid tool, and like I say, you can double click it and set all the settings. And you can set like the width and height. I very rarely do that. I normally just interactively create it by dragging. But you can do it that way. So just drag and create the design. And if you drag, what you can do, of course, is you can create it the position you want to create it. If you click the document, it will create it, but it will always put it in probably a place that you don't want it to be. So I always find it, so it's nicer just simply to drag and create it with the current settings. But if you click the document, so you just go to the document, click the document, it will bring up this panel. And then you can set the values, like the width. So maybe you want it like 10 and 10. Don't have to, of course. You could have it 100, 100, or 20 and 50. So you can make it an elliptical design if you wish. And of course you can change the settings there, 7. You can change the skew if you wish as well. And click OK, and then you can see the design just created down below. Now personally I don't do that normally. I just create it by dragging, but you can. But if you want it a particular size, you can obviously set it. But of course, if you want it to a particular size, you can always go to the properties panel and set it there. It's just a standard path. Just set the properties. And again, you can change the size. Now, it's not an interactive tool, so you can't manipulate it. I say if you go to the tool, double click it, bring up the panel, you can't modify it. We'd love if it was, but it's not. You can change all of the, it's just, like I say, standard paths. There's standard strokes. You can manipulate them in all kinds of ways. You can also go to the appearance panel, and you can create, obviously combined with the width feature, with brushes, with multiple strokes, multiple fills, you can create all kinds of different, as well as combine with effects. So you can just go to the appearance right side menu and add a stroke. So it's now got 2 strokes, and you can change the values of those, and you can manipulate the position of that stroke within the appearance panel, so it's on top or below. So you can create all kinds of different designs using that. So you can change the colours, so you can have multiple colours. Of course, it reflects the current polar grid. You can't manipulate the polar grid, so it's got radial 20 and radial 10, unfortunately. It'd be really nice if you could. But of course, you can always duplicate, have 2 different designs and put them on top of each other. another solution. So what you can do with that stroke set actually selected, what you can do, you can go to some of the effect settings, maybe offset, and you can then offset and set maybe offset to 10 or 20, and you can create all kinds of different designs simply by changing that. And of course, I've only just added one stroke in the appearance panel. You could add, say, 10 additional strokes and have 10 different offsets applied to them in different combinations. So you can create some very, very unusual designs simply by using the appearance panel, and that can be found via the window menu. And of course, you don't have to just add offset, you can add lots of other different effects as well. And it doesn't have to be added to the stroke, it could be added to the fill and those sort of things. Some work better than others. Well, you can also do effect and warp, maybe go to arc. Now, for some weird reason when I was doing this, or maybe go 3D, I actually did it a bit later with warp, and for some weird reason it didn't do it live. The preview wasn't working particularly well, but it should do. I don't know why it wasn't. However, what you can do, you can go to effect and you can create maybe a 3D design using that. So you've got a 3D polar grid. Of course, what you can also do, you can also export this design into Photoshop and use maybe the 3D features in there. Also, you can go over to the toolbar again, Live Paint, and just click in different positions with different colours. So you can fill the gaps, or maybe the lines themselves if you want to do that. But you can click anywhere there and just fill. You can see option there. And you can change the colour, so you can just simply move the left and right arrow keys and you can just change the colour. And you can click. And you can create some very interesting colourful grids using that approach. And of course, what you can do, you can add other paths on top of this current design as well. That's another possibility. Again, you could use offset. You can also use maybe stylize and drop shadow. So you can add a drop shadow to polar grid. Doesn't have to be just without any backing. Or maybe go to distort and transform and use twist or tweak or maybe zigzag, and you create some interesting different designs there. So you can just change those settings and create some really quite unique designs. Of course, you could maybe create a design without the radial, because it sort of gets in the way a bit. What else can you do? Well, you can go to, obviously, window. I'm just going down to, well, you can also save it to symbols. So what you can do, just add that into your symbols panel. So you can use it maybe at a later date, or maybe go to library, the libraries panel. So you can save it to your library and then reuse it at a later date. Of course, once you've saved it to the library, what you can do, you can also use it in maybe other applications, such as Photoshop. Also, you can add brushes to it using brush libraries. And graphic styles. You can go to window menu and graphic styles. You can bring up, obviously I've got very few graphic styles there. You can, of course, go to the right side menu and add some more. Simply click the graphic style and apply it to the polar grid. Not all of them are particularly brilliant, but obviously if you've got lots of graphic styles, you can apply them in most cases to that polar grid. Some are more effective than others. What you can also do, object menu and maybe warp, envelope, distort. So I'm going to go with make with warp. Now, this sort of, some weird reason, the preview did not work while I was doing this. My apologies for this. Couldn't understand why. I was just changing. Normally, when you change the settings, the preview is on, so it should manipulate that design. But it wasn't, and I don't know why. It should update the design. Now, as soon as I click OK, the resulting warp is applied, but it's normally live, so I'm not certain what was going wrong. Maybe the resources were very low or something on my machine at that point. There's the design there. And again, you can manipulate the warp if you want to continue with that. I'm just going to remove that. Now, what you also can do, you can use various tools, maybe the curvature tool. And they're just basically standard paths, so you can just click on the path. Click on the path and then manipulate it. You can see, simply drag out there. So you just click anywhere on the path, that will add a point, and you can manipulate that. Or you can just go to the actual existing points and manipulate those. So you can create all kinds of very warped and wonderful. Now, as soon as you've done that, of course, you've lost any resemblance to a polar grid, but it's still an effective way of creating some interesting designs, especially maybe if you've created with the concentric setting, say 40 or something, and maybe radial set to 0. And this design can be manipulated in thousands and thousands more ways. Simply double click onto it, and then you can go into isolation mode. And then you can manipulate design, simply move elements around, maybe change the colors. Double click again to go into isolation mode again for that bit, and then you can manipulate it there. And change the colors, maybe change the dash settings, change the fill. Maybe add a style to that particular path. So many unique designs can be created using this approach with just a simple polar grid tool, which on the surface doesn't look like you can create much with. But the polar grid can be used to create all kinds of really amazing artwork. Hope you found this tutorial of interest. Please subscribe to the Graphicist channel, always adding new tutorials about Illustrator, Photoshop and other parts of the Creative Cloud. Any comments, please? Always very nice to hear. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Also a dislike or like. Thank you much.